Hello everybody, welcome to the Virtual Career Lab. We are calling directly from UNDP here in New York City. There is a fire drill going on here in the building, so if every now and then you hear a sound, it's not a quiz, it's just the fire alarm being tested. It's a pleasure being with you again today. As mentioned before, this is the Virtual Career Lab, and our topic is preparing a job application. This is one of the initiatives from the Talent Development Unit with the goal of promoting a self-driven and continuous learning culture at UNDP. We are going to move on to the next slide, but one thing that you have to bear in mind, which is very, very important, this is an interactive session. What does that mean? That means that we are going to ask you to do some work. We're going to give you now 30 seconds to get pen and paper so that you can take notes, you can reflect, and you can participate in a few exercises throughout this presentation. So you have 30 seconds now to get pen and paper and come back to the screen. All right, hope that you now have pen and paper on you. Just doing a last audio check to make sure that everybody can hear us. If you just joined us, please raise your hand or enter yes, I can hear you, or yes in the chat box in the system. And again, every now and then you may hear this noise from a fire drill that's going on in the building. Everything's okay, but we're gonna keep on going. So we got confirmation that everybody can hear us, so we're going to move forward. Today we have multiple speakers to tell you more about preparing a job application. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Diego Ruiz. I am the Deputy Director and Chief of HR here in our Office of Human Resources. I'm very glad to be here with you today and with the rest of the speakers.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Heather Krasna, and I am the Assistant Dean of Career Services at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. And I have about 19 years of experience as a career coach, specifically focused on government, international NGOs, and other organizations focused on public service.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Soyunba from UNDP Mongolia. I'm Human Resources Associate as well as Talent Development Manager in my country office.
And my name is Gustavo Araújo. You may be somewhat familiar with my voice if you participated in previous webinars. We had 420 UNDP personnel across the globe register for this event. Some of you are still trickling in, so welcome if you're joining us now. Again, you're hearing this lovely sound from the fire drill. Everything is going okay. We're just going to continue on with the presentation. As I said, my name is Gustavo Araújo, and I am the Career and Capacity Management Specialist here at UNDP. We are going to move on to the next slide to talk a little bit more about why we have decided to engage in this type of initiative. And this has a lot to do with a continuous learning approach. Diego, could you please tell us a little more about that and how that impacts how we envision things here in human resources?
Thank you so much, Gustavo, and for giving me this segue to talk a little bit about continuous learning. And this is something that, as you're aware by these initiatives that we have had lately and how we are evolving, that continuous learning is a model that we are trying to apply in everything we do on our talent development. And what do we understand as continuous learning? We really refer to and this is a key word, ongoing development of skills, abilities, and knowledge through different formats and different means. We are moving really away from having one single form of delivering a training or learning, and we understand it as a more complex process that involves on-the-job training, that involves, you know, your daily experiences inside and out of the job as well. And this is very important, outside of the job, not only within your professional life at work. And this includes communication, this includes experiences, this includes events like the one we are having now, where we are not only delivering something, but where we are asking you also to participate and to make it more interactive. So we believe that through this combination of methods, we can deliver a richer experience for all of you. The other aspect that is important is that we are focusing really very much on the learner experience. We're focusing on and getting also your feedback. Thank you very much, so that we can, you know, improve the way in which we deliver these learning. I think the continuous learning applies to everything. This is a process.
That's very true.
And what we would like to do is, as you can see in this graph, which is quite enlightening, we are trying to build here a proper environment, and we're trying to build here also an organizational culture that provides this enabling environment and empowerment, so that we can also build into all of us this you know, way of operating where you, while you increase your knowledge, we also expect you to share it with the rest of the organization. You're also going to be on the job training others.
That's a great point, Diego. I think we're moving beyond we have moved beyond the idea of that 5% time spent on learning, for learning to be something that's ongoing and that happens every day in multiple experiences. And this also impacts how we envision career management today, right? One of the things we talk about is that career management, career development is no longer trying to get a promotion, no longer moving up a ladder that may not be so easily found or existent in a lot of organizations. It has a lot to do with building effective career partnerships. And this is a slide that we found from the CEB, the Corporate Leadership Council, regarding the role of employee and managers. Diego, could you tell us a little more about that?
Thank you, Gustavo. I think probably the most important aspect of these of this slide is that traditionally, you know, we are expecting, or there are different expectations in terms of who's responsible for career development. Sometimes very much, and I have seen particularly in our type of organizations, this is very much put on the organization as a responsibility for the organization only. And as you can see here, this is really more about a partnership. This is really something that has both sides working in terms of you know, ensuring that careers are effectively undertaken and taken forward in the organization. As you can see here from our side as employees, very much in terms of ownership. I think I really like that word, and I think probably maybe I would, if there would be one thing or one word that I would take from here, is the first one, which says own. I think ownership is the most important thing. Us as the main or having the starring role in this movie that is our career, and really owning it, be, as we say here, being open about our career aspirations, goals, and working a little bit further in learning about ourselves. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think there's a learning about ourselves in the process of applying for a job and doing these, or in increasing your or improving your career, or you know, developing yourselves. I think there's a lot of work in that ownership of learning about yourself first, And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Of course, from the side of the manager, you know, there's also a responsibility, but I think that if one of the two is not partnering, I think this would not be as effective as it could be.
That's very right. And our goal here at TTU, and particularly within the career management portfolio, is to make sure that we equip staff personnel like you across the globe to own your career development conversations, to understand more about your career aspirations and goals, to be able to identify the skills and experiences that you need, and also train managers and build a culture in which management can be transparent about career opportunities, more transparent than we already are, focus on employee experiences, and also talking about how we can expand your networks and sponsor you for development opportunities that could be upwards, lateral, and to some extent it could even be downwards if that's going to bring you some sort of career benefit in the end. The most important message of this slide is you are in the driving seat of your career. So we're going to move on to our next slide to talk about the Virtual Career Lab initiatives. We have had a few presentations so far. This is our fourth event. We've had presentations on making the most of your LinkedIn profile, preparing for video interviews, preparing for competency-based interviews, and today we are doing one on preparing a job application. This is a roster of basic services we want to offer, but this is just the beginning. As we build more understanding about what career management is here at UNDP and what we can do together, obviously we're going to enhance those offerings to actually reach out to more people across the globe, either in person or with the facilitation of people on site, also here from headquarters directly from New York. So we're going to move on to the pre-session activity review. Hopefully most of you, some of you, have been able to take a look at the activities that we assigned prior to this event. As you can see at the bottom, we have ERT, that's estimated time to read. So in total, these three activities took, what, 24 minutes? So I think we all have about 24 minutes every 2 weeks or month to dedicate to our career. I hope we do. And we had three interesting assignments regarding topics relevant to this particular event today. The number one came from a website that I really, really like. It's called themuse.com. It's a career platform that has a lot of information for individuals who want to build their career. Of course, they also have paid services, so obviously this is not an advertisement or endorsement for the Muse. I'm just saying that it's an interesting place for you to find best practices when it comes to career management. So this was an article on how to write a cover letter, 31 tips you need to know. And you can take approximately less than 15 minutes to read the article. The next one was a list of action verbs by skills and categories from a site called Quintessential. You have the link right there. And you can take a look at what kind of verbs you could use to actually describe what you do, the job that you do, how you add value to the organization, how you actually explain to other people how you do and why you love what you love for work. The next one is something that we find on Mind Tools called the Personal SWOT Analysis, making the most of your talent and opportunities. And we are trying to highlight Mind Tools as much as possible during those career labs, because this is a tool that you have available for you for free on the intranet as part of our learning portal. Now let's test our knowledge of these tasks that we assigned you here. I am going to look at one of the polls. The first poll is a question. And the question is the following: which of the tips from the article, How to Write a Cover Letter, 31 Tips You Need to Know, does not fit? I'm going to give you 15 seconds for you to guess an answer. If you have not read the article, that's okay. Take your best guess.
question as well.
All right, everyone. Now we are back, and I'm going to close the poll, and we're going to look at the results. I'll share the results right now. So as you can see, 32% of you said describe your job in current detail. 22% said don't regurgitate your resume. 16% said highlight the right experiences. 22% said write in the company organization's voice. And 8% said keep it short and sweet. So the answer that does not fit is don't regurgitate your resume. This is something that you should not do. Another thing that's important, that's definitely don't describe your job in full details. Make sure that you have some information, but don't go all over again answering questions about your job, because they can find that in the description. What you must emphasize is you highlight the right experiences and you write in the company organization's voice. You try and keep short and sweet. Now we're going to close the poll, and we are going to move on to a second brief exercise, a second brief poll here, which is the SWOT analysis question. This one says, in the personal SWOT analysis article on Mind Tools, what does SWOT mean? We're going to give you 15 seconds to answer. All right, we are going to close the poll right now, and I'm going to release the results. So 88% of you answered it correctly. SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you can find on Mind Tools a very interesting article about how you can assess your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is typically an expression used for organizations to actually assess themselves, but you can actually conduct this exercise for yourself in your own career. If you want more information about that, just visit Mind Tools, and you can find that under the learning portal here at UNDP. So thank you for taking these quizzes. We have a few more later in the presentation. Now we're going to go over the learning agenda. And again, we apologize for the fire drill that's currently going on. Everything's alrighty here in New York City, but bear in mind that they're just testing the system. When it comes to what we want to learn today, we have multiple topics that we want to emphasize. The first thing is emphasizing planning your application. Then an important factor of understanding the job you want to apply for is understanding the job description. So we're going to go over that as well. Also, we're going to provide you tips on creating a cover letter. We're also going to ask you to do an exercise on describing your duties and responsibilities and come up with a sample for us. We're also going to go over competencies and putting the job description in context. What does it mean? What are the hidden messages potentially? What are the transparent messages that a lot of people don't get from looking at the job description? We're also going to get tips from a hiring manager, and we are also going to have the country office perspective when our colleague Soyombo is going to be talking to us regarding her experience here at TDU. And then we're going to give you a little bit of a follow-up exercise for those of you who are interested in following up after the event. Okay? So we are going to be moving on to a very interesting part of this session today, which is regarding planning your application. As you can see here, a lot of individuals, especially when they're applying for positions in the UN system, they believe that you should apply to as many positions as possible. And unfortunately, this kind of tactic does not work. And that may bring a lot of frustration for individuals who may say, well, but I've applied 100 times and I never heard anything. Well, if you've applied 100 times and you never heard back, it may be time for you to assess the jobs that you're applying for, why you're applying for the jobs, and the target agencies and organizations that you are applying for, because there could be something in there that you may not necessarily maximizing your ability to put in a good application. Okay, the number of applications does not affect your chances of being considered if you're not qualified for the position or if you're not putting your best foot forward. So you need to consider the fit of the application for the job in question. Okay, so the first thing you want to look is the following. When you're planning your application, look at the job description and consider what are the main tasks and projects of the work unit that you're considering to work for. Number 2 would be, is this work area for you? Number 3 would be, do you have the relevant skills and experience to actually apply for this position? Number 4, even if you have the relevant skills and experience, would you enjoy the tasks associated with this job, with this position? Following up, does your profile match the minimum requirements? And one very important one, even if it does meet the minimum requirements, realistically, do you match the job? Or what is the competition level like for everyone else who not only meet the minimum requirements, but surpass them and could be a potential better fit than you? In other words, what we are trying to do here is just to let you know that you should research and research a lot before applying. We are going to move on now to looking at the job description per se. So as you can see here, this is a basic job description for UNDP, which is not very different from job descriptions in other UN agencies or even some in the private sector. This job has already closed, so that's why I put it available there. And this is basic information for most of you, but some of you may be may need to be aware of a lot of the details mentioned there, especially when it comes to vacancy type, whether it's a fixed-term contract or a temporary assistance contract, if it's an international position, if it's a general service position, or if it's a term of reference rather than a job description for a consultancy, and also looking at the contract duration. This is extremely important for all of you to actually consider, obviously including the duty station, languages required, and the practice area job family within which this job can be found. When you look at the duties and responsibilities as well, you need to check out these in very much details. In some organizations, this section may be called key functions and results expected, such as at the IAEA, or UNICEF calls them key accountabilities and duties and tasks, or OSCE calls them tasks and responsibilities. So what you want to do is zero in on these duties and responsibilities. And for us to do that, I want to highlight some items of this job description per se. If you look at the duties and responsibilities, you can say supports UNDP country offices and requisitioning units with the identification and management of procurement and supply chain management related risks. Another one is communicates outcomes of procurement processes. Another one is manages and oversees issuance of purchase orders and contracts. Another one is monitors supplier performance. So what you want to emphasize is how can you show the hiring manager and the panel that you have conducted these tasks before, that you have directly relevant experience with these exact tasks so that you can hit the ground running. If you're able to do that, that means that potentially you have gone beyond meeting the minimum requirements, and you do have to be very direct, succinct, and concise in actually informing the hiring managers via your cover letter and your application in description of duties and responsibilities, in letting them know that you can hit the ground running. But not all of us can hit the ground running with everything, right? There could be some items that you may just want to emphasize directly relevant transferable skills. So if you have not conducted these tasks in the past, but you feel like you have relevant experience, how do you convey that to the hiring manager? That you have directly relevant transferable skills, or that you at least have the potential to have a very quick learning curve if you are offered the job and you take it up. So in other words, when you look at the duties and responsibilities in items 3 and 4, compiles and analyzes historical data and forecasts, manages data requests, internal and external, identifies areas for analysis and opportunities. This is something that if you do not have direct relevant experience, or you have conducted the tasks, you need to actually go back on your job descriptions, the current or past, and try and align it and try and show the hiring manager that some of the tasks may have been similar, or that you show that you have the potential to learn them very, very quickly in case you are selected for the job. We are going to move on now to the UNDP core competencies. And as you can see listed in there, the UNDP core competencies, they are 5, but we do also have a few technical and functional competencies as well.
Yes, just to mention here, it is very important that you review very carefully in the job description what are the competencies and the level that we are seeking out in a for a particular job. But we normally also include functional or technical competencies that are very specific for the job. So, and this brings me a little bit back to what Gustavo was saying. I think to do this correctly, you really need to research, and that takes time. So it is a question of investment, and the right investment in being very careful, and as Gustavo is doing here, dissecting the job description. So I think you need to do that. I think you need at the same time to be very much aware of what type of organization you are applying to. Not all of the UN organizations are the same. Mm-hmm. And therefore, even the competencies may vary. These are UNDP core competencies, so you need to be quite aware of that. So don't do as much research as you can. Get involved as much as you can in getting to know the organization.
Very true. And you can see information about their core competencies, especially when it comes to the levels needed for that particular position, by looking at the job description. And you, as UNDP personnel, you also have access to the internet, which means that you can find more details of our competencies, not only the core competencies, but also the technical and functional competencies needed for the job and the levels needed for that particular job, which is very much important and very much focused on by the hiring managers in the panel. So you should become familiar with the primary and the secondary technical functional competencies and their levels as well. Now what we're going to do is stop for a few questions. We're going to give 10 seconds to see if questions pop up, and we're going to put us on mute for a little bit while we see the questions come in. We're going to try and answer them as efficiently as possible. All right, we got one question here. So, building effective career partnership between managers and employees is very essential and depend more or less on the relationship between them, the willingness and capacity of managers to support career development of their staff, which needs innovative managers. What do you do to build such relationship between manager and staff? And that's an amazing question, and this is something that we do want to address in the very near future. Part of my goal is to actually have sessions focused on supervisees, on how to have career conversations with your managers, and also sessions focused on the managers on how to have career conversations with your supervisees. And this goes beyond the manager and supervisor per se, right? You can also rely on potential mentors, potential coaches, and part of the portfolio of career management is actually to develop initiatives, including a mentoring initiatives that we would like to pilot for country officers, especially those in hardship duty stations, and eventually move forward across the globe to all positions if possible and to all staff as per resources available. We're going to look for another question right now. All right, we have another question. Could you please, what type of CV format should be used? Achievement-oriented CV or competency-based CV format? Diego, what would you say about that?
I think probably what is more important, I would say it depends on the job, really. And it's very difficult to say which one is better, and you know, even tendencies of around these vary. But what I think is most important, and we're going to talk about this, is that you are very specific, and that you use active voice in your the description of whatever you did.
Yes.
Active voice is very important. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But this means in describing what you have done, to describe them as achievements, as you're mentioning there, as things, and of course you can, I think, focus them around competencies. But I think what people are looking, and remember that you're going to be in hundreds and hundreds of CVs. I think it's very important that what you put in there is very easy for the person who's evaluating to read and to get a good view of who you are in the first 20 seconds.
I think a good practice as well is the following. When you look at the job description, put yourself in the role of the manager and the recruiter and ask yourself this question. If I were the manager and the recruiter with hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications to go through, how would I identify myself as a contender right away?
Exactly.
That would definitely give you some perspective. One last question before we move on for time's sake. Someone is asking about the level of competencies. A lot of the job descriptions may include the level of competencies depending on the organization. For UNDP, you can also find the levels of the competencies in its descriptions on the internet. You just look at the UNDP intranet for the competency framework, and you can find the levels for the core competencies and potential technical competencies as well. Now we're going to move on to the next section of our presentation. What we have here is required skills and experience. This is an item that you see in all job descriptions, right? So you see education, experience, and languages. When we move to the next slide, one thing that you see for the job description that we are kind of dissecting here today, we have education, advanced university degree in business administration, commerce, or law, or related technical field. For experience, minimum 2 years of progressively responsible, relevant professional experience in health procurement, preferably at the international level. Language, fluency in English, both written and oral. So a good percentage, better yet, a great percentage of candidates looking over this job description may meet these minimum requirements. These are the skills and experience. Your job is also to let us know, how do you stand out? How do you catch the eye of the hiring manager and the recruiter from the beginning? Because you're going to be competing with a lot of people who meet these exactly minimum requirements. And as a former recruiter myself, I heard a lot of people complaining, I don't understand why I didn't get interviewed. I meet all of the requirements. Well, you may be meaning that you meet all of the minimum requirements, and maybe you may have neglected a way to show in the job, in the description of your duties in your application, that you stand out and you could potentially be the best candidate for the position. Another important item as well is be very forthright when it comes to your language fluency abilities. It's not uncommon when a position says we need at least intermediate French or advanced Chinese or another language, being UN language or not, for individuals throughout the process to request proof of levels of fluency, or even if you moved on to an interview, for them to ask you a question in the language that you reportedly is fluent on. So this is something that you should be very, very mindful of. When it comes to putting the job description in context, a nice way to kind of conceptualize this is looking at that as a pyramid. So you look at the qualifications, experience, and language skills at the bottom of this pyramid. What does that mean? Most people looking at their job description will meet that. So just because you meet that does not mean that you should be guaranteed an interview or consideration. Then you move up to the competencies and expertise. So as you go up, it becomes a little more funneled. Some people may actually meet all of the minimum requirements, but do not necessarily possess the competencies and expertise required. And it moves up to the duties and responsibilities. Are you familiar with those duties and responsibilities? Would you be able to hit the ground running? If you would not be able to hit the ground running, by that I mean start the job and really very quickly pick it up and not necessitate too much training to get started. If not, do you have transferable skills to speed up your learning curve? If not, do you have previous experiences that indicate potential? So these are items that are very interesting for you to consider. And I added these people in the pyramid here in order to emphasize that as you go up this funnel, this pyramid, there's less and less people being considered for the role. Okay? We're going to move on again to more questions. We're going to give you 30 seconds and see if we find a few more questions coming up. Okay, somebody just asked about can we say that there is a minimum or standard requirement under the academic and language areas, or would the professional experience be more relevant? Listen, when we're talking about minimum requirements, they are the minimum requirements. And we assign minimum requirements for multiple purposes. If you do not meet the minimum requirements, I find that quite unlikely that you would be considered unless you have some relevant experience that would mitigate the lack of meeting the minimum requirements. And the UN system tends to be more stringent about those requirements for multiple reasons. If you go to the private sector, they may give you a little bit more, cut some slack, as they say here in the US. However, I would as a rule of thumb, you would try and make sure that you meet the minimum requirements, or at least 75 to 80% of them, in order to consider yourself a potential contender. But if you do not meet the minimum requirement, I would definitely try and find a way to show in your application that you have experiences that mitigate for the fact that you do not meet the minimum. When it comes to degrees, for example, if the position is requiring a master's degree and you do not have one, chances are that you wouldn't even be looked at because you're not meeting this bare minimum requirement. However, if the position requires advanced level of a language, you may have intermediate, depending on the needs of the job. This could be something that could be discussed, and the hiring manager could invite people with those types of levels of fluency to find out more information. So the goal is to put yourself on the radar of the hiring manager. We're going to move on now to the next slide. And now we're going to talk to one of our new team members here at TDU. And Soyombo is here from Mongolia. Soyombo, could you tell us a little more about what you are, about yourself in your job at UNDP?
Hi again, and I'm Soyombo, and I'm a Human Resources Associate at UNDP Mongolia, as well as Talent Development Manager in my country office.
Yes, and what exactly are you doing here at headquarters?
I'm here under detailed assignment with Talent Development Unit and working with Gustavo on assisting to develop a framework for new career management website. So basically we are planning to revamp the current career management website, and also I'm supporting Gustavo creating career management framework. We're working on the career management strategy, and also supporting to develop and release a career management newsletter that you will receive very soon, as well as to support TDU, Talent Development Unit, have better support talent development managers around the globe.
Very good. And Soyombo will be someone who will be very active when she goes back to the Mongolia office, because she will be facilitating with us here in New York, and Soyombo live facilitating in Mongolia 1 or 2 workshops in the future. And our goal is to have other talent development managers also participate in this kind of program here with TDU and spend a little time with us here in New York, so that we can get your perspective, learn from you, and develop initiatives that would better assist our national officers all over the UNDP system. So Soyombo, how did you find out about this opportunity?
I found out about this opportunity through Talent Development Managers Network in Yammer, as well as I have received email from TDU.
Okay, very good. And could you tell us something that you have learned here at TDU, at UNDP, that you found interesting, that you didn't know before, or that that you think you're gonna take back to Mongolia and kind of act on?
Yeah, working in country office, sometimes we don't know how much HQ colleagues are doing, and I was lucky to participate the town hall meeting and the midterm review of OHR, and also midterm of Talent Development Unit. And I was so impressed how much work and development work they are doing it here, and also the different units in OHR is working together to provide more integrated services to the clients. So because that is needed in country offices as well. So by the end of this assignment, I will able to tell more what I can take to the country office.
Thank you, Soyombo. I want to make sure to take this opportunity to actually commend you on how well you're doing here. So we're very excited and pleased that you're spending time with us. Soyombo started, and on the first day she was already adding value, giving us the country office from Mongolia's perspective. and helping us kind of deliver better initiatives and products for people in country offices as well. So thank you for that. Going back to the topic, we're going to look at describing your achievements and duties. This is an important part of the job application because there is a formula that you can follow to make sure that you present the best information possible to the application reviewers when creating your job descriptions. And so, Yombo, can you tell us a little more about that?
Describing duties is not enough to get the attention of the hiring manager. So I'm going to share a number of ways you describe your achievement in your job application. First, positive results. The question you ask yourself is, what is it that you have done well at your job? Second, focus on your role. What was your impact? Third, quantify. Are you able to provide numbers and metrics to show the hiring manager on your accomplishments? This is very important. Instead of giving very narrative the duties you have done, if you provide the metrics or the numbers that quantifiable to show your achievement. Next one, awards. Have you received any awards, acknowledgements for your performance? Next one, relevant skills. What are the skills relevant to this position that you can highlight while describing your current and past duties? The last but not the least, impact. We are repeating this because it's very important. What was your impact?
Very good, Soyombo. Thank you for that. And just to give you an example of how this could be brought back to the UNDP context, or even the UN context overall, we have a few examples here. So a first example that I could have is an example for a procurement analyst. A procurement analyst relates dedication to best value for money. So a way that a procurement analyst can actually speak about how he or she did that is negotiated contracts with multiple vendors and saved the organization over $250,000, pounds, euros in discounts. Another way, a monitoring evaluation officer shows contribution to a development program. And how would he or she describe his or her specific task? Conducted 25 monitoring visits in 5 countries to assess the progress, output, and adherence to guidelines. Or a program officer that tries to demonstrate increased resource mobilization, helped grow program sponsorship from 30,000 to 75,000 in 1 year through active outreach to private partners. Or a recruiter trying to highlight the impact of outreach activities, conducted 30 online presentations to more than 5,000 potential applicants, including prospects in niche and hard-to-recruit job families. And this is actually something that I use in my resume myself because this is my own example. So it's not perfect, but it's a good practice kind of example to give. Now let's take a look at a practice. I'd like you guys all over to actually take 5 minutes to think about 3 accomplishments that make you proud. Okay, you've got pen and paper there. So think about 3 accomplishments that make you proud. Or think about a particularly challenging assignment that you've had. Or think about the fact that if you participated in a solution that improved service to internal or external clients, or enhanced efficiency, or saved money or time, or increased productivity. Okay? Or you can think about an achievement. Have you received praise, recognition in your job? How about completing projects ahead of deadline? Or did you receive a promotion, award, or commendations from clients? Or if you were selected for special projects, committees, or task forces, what was your impact? Or if you quit your job, what would everybody say about your work at your goodbye party? Are you known throughout your organization or department or unit for something that you do is special? I'd like you to take 5 minutes, take a look at these questions, and think of at least 3 examples of how you could describe an achievement or an accomplishment or something that could be adding value to your job application. So we'll give you for now to get started 2.5 minutes, and we'll get back to you and check on the temperature, see how many people are doing the exercises. All right, I hope you're very hard at work. We still have a little time. Just think about, if you cannot come up with 3, please just come up with 1 accomplishment and try and quantify it using the tips that Soyombo gave to you not long ago. I'm putting back on the slides the examples from the procurement analyst, monitoring evaluation officer, program officer, and recruiter for you to have a sample as well. If you have them, you can start typing them and give me examples in the chat feature. As you're creating them, it would be great if we could share some examples, and then we get back so everybody can benefit from your experience. We're having a few examples coming in. Please keep them coming. We're going to give you 30 more seconds to write your accomplishment. Please write them down in the chat feature so that we can share with other folks here. So now we're going to read a few examples. Do not worry, I'm not going to mention the name in case you're shy. So with the first example that we have here is, let's go to the first one here. Wow, we're getting a lot of examples, so thank you for that. The first one, an example of a program coordinator, okay? What the person wrote was, coordinated and successfully raised funds for the construction of 6 rural primary schools. Over 1,000 children returned to school. So that's a great example of using an active verb, telling exactly what you did and the impact that you had on the program itself. Another example here, analyze payments made to UN volunteers during the Ebola mission in Ghana in 2015 and discovered over $40,000 wrongly paid out. Through outreach to the recipients, managed to recover $26,000 for the mission. So that's another outstanding example. Let's look at another example here. Enhance the quality of images used in UNDP communications products. Very, very good. Let's do two more. Established guidelines and best practices in relation to photography and visual assets. That's also something that's very interesting. And the last example we can share, negotiated 1 UN LTAs for agencies in Guyana, saving time, money, and other resources, and simultaneously promoted and presented UN agencies as one-two suppliers. So thank you again for all of those examples. They're very, very good examples, and I can tell that you were definitely paying attention when we were actually describing the best way to promote yourself and talk to us about how you conduct your job on a daily basis. Now let's move on to a few more questions. We're going to give you 30 seconds to come up with more questions. Okay, I have a very specific question here. The person says, from my experience, people who are looking through applications and looking at a specific, they are looking at very specific experience, literally matching the wording of the job vacancy to information in P11 forms down to the months of experience, rather than looking at transferable skills, past achievements, and relevant experience on the job. Even if a person's current job is somewhat different, my question is, how is it possible to find a common ground? It seems that people who are scanning applications are not always trained to select the right candidates. I tend to disagree with that as a former recruiter myself, and I've worked not only at international organizations, but also in the private sector. And I can say that the people who worked with me, at least in my previous organizations, including this one, they've been very, very trained to look at exactly what the hiring manager is looking for. What I tell you is the following: maybe the jobs that you're applying for may not necessarily be the best match. A lot of times, some jobs may actually provide some leeway for people with transferable skills to jump in. Other jobs may require exactly the same level of duties and responsibilities required. It's a matter of judgment as well. A lot of times it may be a matter of timing. So what I would do would be make sure that I know and understand very well the dynamics of the job that one is applying for, including what's going on in the marketplace. If you're applying for a job, and I say that as someone with a background in liberal arts, in psychology, and working in HR, it's not as difficult to find an HR person as it is finding a nuclear engineer, which are the people I use to recruit. So me, myself, as an HR person, I need to make sure that when I apply for the position, that I apply for a position in which I'm going to try and stand out as much as possible as the other 600 to 1,200 colleagues who can be very well regarded and professionally experienced as well. How is it that I'm going to stand out to them? So you also need to check the temperature of the landscape to see if you are actually putting in applications to the positions that actually deserve your attention and you're potentially competitive to apply for. Okay, let's see if I can find how do you tackle intangible work such as policy, which is hard to measure? You don't have to necessarily measure. You can just say developed policy and procedures and guidelines for a department which impacted in 1, 2, and 3. So when we mention quantify, we don't necessarily mean quantifying just in numbers. You can actually qualitatively quantify the impact that you may have had with the job that you did in your previous experiences.
Can I chime in on that?
Of course.
So again, this is Heather. I would add that with policy, you could talk about, for example, you did a literature review of 600 policies from 40 countries. You could talk about creating a report, a policy memo, and then presenting that to the chief of the mission or whatever it is. Who ended up seeing your deliverable, your outcome, your report, and what was the impact? Did they implement your policy? In policy analysis, sometimes they don't actually have the ability to implement a policy that you've recommended, but if they did, and that policy had a positive impact, then that can go in your resume as another achievement. So even with something a little bit less quantifiable, such as policy, you still can think about your outcomes. What did you deliver, and to whom, and was it implemented? What was the final result of your achievement?
Thank you for that, Heather. That's actually quite good. And Heather is very experienced with that, especially experienced with individuals who have very similar backgrounds, working in public sector, working in nonprofit government agencies. So this is very well-timed advice. We are moving on now to creating a cover letter. There are 3 things that you need to consider when creating a cover letter. You need to think about the introduction, where you're going to outline your motivation for the position. You need to think about the argument, where you need to show an understanding of the position and the job requirements, and you need to highlight your professional accomplishments. And you need to think of the closing. Close on why you should be considered. The goal here is to be short and sweet. Do not regurgitate your resume. They do have your application. They do have your duties and responsibilities. What you want to do is, as you assess the job description, try and pick out what, if you were the hiring manager, what kind of person would you be trying to hire for this position, okay? And how would you actually write a concise and specific cover letter? We're gonna get some tips now from a hiring manager, and no one better than the boss to actually give us some information on that.
Okay, on the cover letter. Thank you, Gustavo. So, again, maybe we go back to the issue of thousands and thousands of applications and the fact that you need to be very concise in the cover letter. I think what is important is that you use the cover letter as an opportunity to highlight those, and we have already discussed about our achievements and putting them in active voice and, you know, doing all of this, but some of them might be buried in your CV. Even if you make it short, it might be difficult for the recruiter to be able to, you know, get to these highlights or to these pearls or to these golden nuggets that you have there. I suggest that you really focus on choosing the most salient ones, those that you think are particularly key to that job. Also, if there is any specific thing you want to highlight about yourself, any special studies, languages, for example, or things that you think will really differentiate you from the rest. So what are those things that are going to make you different? You have to make it concise. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to start with a short paragraph, you know, describing your interest. Make it very short. I mean, everybody will be writing that, and then jump really directly into those issues that you want to highlight. As I was going to say, sometimes it's not a bad idea even to use bullet points. You can be very concise on those bullet points. It is easy for a person to read when you have that, and if you put 5 or 6 of those key things you want to highlight about yourself, and then you close it. Remember that in some cases there are also limitations in the amount of space that you can use to write a cover letter. So that really forces you to be concise. So don't write a long story there. People want to get to the point. Be short. I would recommend not more than 1 starting paragraph, maybe a set of bullet points, or if you want to put in paragraph mode your key achievements, and then finalize with a closing paragraph. That would be it.
Very good. And just to summarize, make sure that you follow instructions regarding cover letter and job application. A lot of the times we receive applications which people follow no instructions, and it's pretty clear. Be professional and straightforward. The letter should be clear, well written, and properly formatted. Avoid slang and informal language, and use complete sentences. For most of you, this may sound like basic of writing in any language. However, a lot of people forget to do that. Now let's move on to another part of our segment here. We're going to talk to Heather Krasna. Again, thank you very much for coming to talk to us, Heather. And if that's okay, I have a few questions for you so that we can inform potential staff here in personnel UNDP about how you conceptualize the career management and the job application process. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So what would you say would be the typical concerns individuals present regarding career management in your experience?
Great question. And again, I'm honored to be here today. I find that when people are looking for a new opportunity or they're reassessing where they are in their career, there's three main driving factors. And one of the challenges is prioritizing which of these factors are the most important to you. So the first is making sure you're using the skills that you're most excited to use, maybe growing new skills that you would like to expand upon, potentially maybe stopping the usage of skills you're really bored using or just dislike using, that you might be great at certain things, but you would like to move on and learn new things. So the skills and job function are one key motivator. A second may be the mission, the population being served, maybe geographic areas that are being served, or even the industry or sector. Some people are very motivated for, let's say, maternal and child health, or even something more specific, potentially nutrition or whatever. And so sometimes people look to switch gears because they would like to be part of a different mission area. The third motivator is the lifestyle and values, and these are things such as salary, culture of your office, your relationship with your supervisor, your co-workers, work-life balance, maybe other personal issues, a desire to relocate to a new location. Sometimes as people become a little older and they have a family, these issues can become paramount and cause you to be interested in switching gears. So prioritizing is one of the biggest concerns, figuring out what is your key motivator, how do you formulate what you're interested in, and then using that information to clarify which positions are the right fit for you right now and for your future, your next step. Another issue I find that comes up, a big concern, is that this process can be very stressful for people. I don't want to overestimate that, but it is something to acknowledge that, like we've been discussing, there's some rejection involved. Even the most wonderful people, the most high-performing experts can be rejected for a position, and they can be frustrated and upset about that. And it's just part of the process that you sometimes have to adjust to. Some people are such a wonderful overachiever that they have never been rejected before, and so this is hard for them to get their head around, but just remembering that it's part of the process. So a lot of people do have that question, why was I not selected? And I wanted to sort of share a brief statistic which I found. There was a recent survey, and I will acknowledge that this is very United States centric, so I apologize in advance, but it was a study by a company called JobVite, which is an applicant tracking software, analysis of 69 million job postings. They found that on average 59 people apply for a posting, 12% of those people get an interview, and of those 12% of people who get an interview, only 17% of those people get an offer, which means, and this is a U.S. national average, you have to apply to 8.4 jobs just to get one interview, and you have to go to 6 interviews to get one job offer on average. Now, as we were discussing, this also depends tremendously on your particular job market. So if you are in a very high demand occupation, like I notice, at least in the US, statisticians, computer programmers, these are certain occupations in tremendously high demand, you don't have to work as hard. Whereas if you're in an occupation where there's many qualified candidates and also lots of people excited to do that work, maybe the more creative occupations or the more entry level, and then competition can be much more challenging, and these percentages might be quite different for you. You may have to apply to many more positions. So those are some of the typical issues that come up.
That's great. It's great to hear. I would assume that in the UN system, the numbers may be even a little higher.
I'm sure.
From what I remember at the International Atomic Energy Agency, where I used to work, we interviewed less than 5% of our applicants, and there were some positions, for example, that we received over 600 applications, and especially, let's say, in certain areas such as law, legal officers, a lot of these 600 were very well qualified individuals that they were quite impressive people, so it was quite difficult to actually get from the pool, assuming that a lot of these individuals not only met the minimum requirements, but went beyond the minimum requirements they were applying. Mm-hmm. So Heather, talking about job applications per se, what are the common mistakes people usually make?
So one of the classic mistakes is actually something very basic, which is spelling and grammar. If you have a mistake, if you haven't paid enough attention in your application, you can be disqualified very quickly. Another challenge is, again, like was mentioned before, applying for positions that you might not really be qualified for. Some people are very optimistic, and that's a nice quality. But again, if you're really missing some very essential component of the job, you should ask yourself, is this worth taking the time for me to apply, or should I focus on something where I meet or exceed the requirements? But the flip side, the opposite of that, is also sometimes the case. Sometimes I work with people who are a little too worried and hesitant to apply for positions where they may be qualified because they're missing one small minor component. And so I always mention, I work with many statisticians, so the question is, what's the probability of getting a job if you did not apply for the job? It's a very low probability. Maybe there's some magic that could happen, but unlikely. You need to apply. So if you have the time and the energy, and this is a good fit for you in most ways, and you can show those transferable skills, take the time to apply if you're excited about that. Another thing people do is maybe they only look at the most obvious organizations, the ones that are the most famous, the most, maybe the most glamorous or something, the ones that are the most exciting, and they forget that there's many other agencies and organizations that might be working on the same mission or might have a similar position for you. So thinking a little more outside of the box, as they say, a little more creatively about where you could potentially find a position. Those are some mistakes that people make. And last but not least, the using of the right wording. We mentioned it a little bit when you were talking about the job description, but using the actual acronyms, proper nouns, keywords, that's very important, because occasionally I have seen, and I don't know if it happens so much in the UN, but I know that in some cases recruiters may use the software to just look for certain words, and if that word is, let's say, in the job title, or it's an acronym or a proper noun repeatedly mentioned throughout the job, and you never mention this anywhere in your CV or your resume, it's never in your cover letter, then you might be excluded. They might not even really review your application. So make sure you're using the right wording from the job description. It might be computer software. It might be specific, again, acronyms. Another quick mistake I notice is sometimes people invest a lot of time on their cover letter, and they make it very tailored, but then they send the same CV and resume to every job without any tailoring. And sometimes people make the opposite mistake. They write a very brief cover letter. It's very generic. We can tell you didn't tailor this to the job. You really have to spend the time on both, because someone will read both probably, and they can tell easily if you just start clicking on the apply button over and over without really paying attention. So you do have to spend time to tailor both of those things.
Very good. In your opinion, what are the three most important things you should pay attention to when you're creating a job application?
So first, again, the accuracy, attention to details, making sure you've double-checked everything. I notice sometimes that it's easier to proofread your own resume if you read it backwards from the bottom to the top, or you have several friends review it, because you've read it so many times, you'll miss an error. Also, following all the instructions. That's the second problem. Sometimes people skip something, and sometimes these applications can be very, very detailed or require certain special essays or anything like that. So make sure you follow the instructions. And, you know, again, using wording and keywords from the description, another key thing to make sure you pay attention to.
All right. But since we have you here as well, and just to give a little flavor of what we would like to actually talk to people about in the future, is touching upon career management, career development topics overall, to educate and learn more about it. So how do you conceive of career development? How has it changed over the years, and how do you use this knowledge in your practice as someone who works with people who are going through looking for jobs or career transitions?
Sure.
Like that.
So things definitely have changed. I think that in the many years ago, people may have been in a similar position or same organization for their whole career, and then they retire after 25 years, and like you've mentioned, they get their gold watch and retire, which is like what used to be. That doesn't seem to be the case so often anymore. So people do have to become more flexible. They may not necessarily be getting promoted in the same exact way that they maybe have expected, and so being flexible to consider a lateral move or looking at other ways you could build and expand on your knowledge, maybe looking for what they call a stretch assignment, where it's something you get to challenge yourself to learn something new or to be on a detail or rotation if you can arrange that, like we have our colleagues here. And, you know, sometimes the organizations have restructured themselves, so there's less opportunities in some of the middle positions. So figuring out how you navigate this new landscape and building your network, gaining from your colleagues so that you can help each other in this process. I think all those things have changed over the years.
Very good. This is wonderful advice. I really appreciate it. And just to finalize, well, since you are such an expert on these areas, would you have any online resources or things you typically recommend to your clients that you could recommend to our audience today?
Sure. So there's many free resources available online now. My favorite is one of my favorites is LinkedIn. For many reasons, it's great for networking. It does have a job board, but it's also very good for research. For example, you can look at the profiles of other people who work in an organization that you admire and look at the skills that are repeatedly mentioned on their profile, and that will give you an education about which skills are needed in that kind of organization. There's also some general purpose job boards. Just even reading the job descriptions, like you mentioned, is very educational. If you read 5 job descriptions, all 5 of them require you to be fluent in French. Maybe it's time for you to go back and do those French coursework that you might be delaying and learn those new skills. There are a few other databases that might be more, again, specific to the U.S., but Glassdoor is a great website, glassdoor.com. People review places where they've worked. Also, there's some salary resources, salary.com, payscale.com. If you're looking for NGOs, there's a good website called guidestar.org. And last but not least, some nice niche job boards. For example, DevX is one that's very common in international development. And then Relief Web is another one. Relief Web is for humanitarian type of work. So there's a number of these kind of smaller job boards that I find very helpful.
Very, very good, Heather. Very appreciated. This is wonderful advice, and I'm sure people really appreciate having your perspective here today.
Thanks.
We are going to do one more poll, and that's it's based on what we have seen from what Heather talked to us today. Let me just look at the next poll here, which is I'm going to launch, and the question is, according to Heather, what is the most common motivation for people to change jobs? So we're going to give you 30 seconds to start answering that. All right, so we had over 50% of the folks voted. Let me close the poll, and let me share the results. And Heather, could you tell us a little more about the answers?
Great question. So I noticed that a good percentage, 40% of people said job function, 23% of people said salary, 12% mission, and 25% lifestyle factors. Casual Fridays, nobody answered, which is fine. And the answer to this really, this is a trick question because it depends a little bit. Every person is different. But my personal observation after working with thousands of job seekers is that as people maybe they get older and their lifestyle changes, it's often the lifestyle factors that prompt them to make a big move. But again, these factors could change at any time of your life, and for every person it's a little bit different. The key thing is to identify what's important to you and try to ask yourself those hard questions. What's most important to me? Should I look for the salary? Should I look for a work-life balance? Or is it the mission I care about the most if I had to choose one? Or can I make my top 5 list of things that are most important?
Very good. So thank you for that. This is very insightful, and it really puts a lot of information into perspective for all of us. We are getting to the end of this presentation. I understand that we've gone a little bit over time, so we apologize for that. But I would like to highlight that we do have a lot of resources here at UNDP and TDU for you to grow in your career. I would encourage all of you to visit your Talent Development Center today. All you need to do is go to the intranet. And if you want to find Mind Tools, for example, you can go to the intranet, visit TDU or learning.undp.org to access the intranet. Then you can go to Catalog. From Catalog, you can go to Web-Based Training. Then you find Mind Tools, where you can find a lot of tips, self-assessment quizzes, articles, and videos regarding career management and career development. I would also like to highlight that we do have our Learning at UNDP newsletter. You can find the back issues under Resource Center. On the screen here, you can see the Resource Center button, and you can actually access the back issues. The current newsletter is on leadership. The next one will be on career management, and Soyombo and I and a few other members of the team are currently working on it, and we're trying to get some very exciting, useful articles and resources for all of you. So in order to access Mind Tools again, just go to the Talent Development Center, which is the former learning management system, and find it on the intranet. Now we have time for 1 or 2 final questions before we end the session today. Let me take a look at the questions, and we'll get back to you in a second. All right, we actually received a lot of questions regarding the topic of being overqualified for a job and applying for it. So Diego, what would you tell us about that?
Okay, I think what a recruiter is looking for is the best fit for the job. So we would not be looking at, as a recruiter, you would not be looking at underqualified or overqualified. You're really looking at those that really meet the needs of the job you're doing. So if you are overqualified for a job, you really need to think if this is really a suitable job for you, or if it is a situation where this is the only option that you have, which could be the case, then you really need to make a good effort so that your CV is, and your cover letter is tailored to the job. Again, because even if you're overqualified, you can show the fit for the job if you are, if you do your research and you put your CV and your cover letter to respond to that job. Then, you know, overqualification would not matter in a way, because you're not going to put things there that don't fit for that job, that are overqualified for that job. You will really focus on those that respond to what is needed. So that would be probably the advice in this case. And of course, if a recruiter sees somebody that's overqualified and sees somebody that is less qualified but fits to the job, the recruiter will certainly possibly go for that one that fits most of the job.
Thank you, Diego. And before we finish today, we want to be very mindful that we want to provide resources that are relevant across the globe. So I would like all of you, if you have resources about career management, career development, if they have even resources in your own native languages, or potential speakers that could actually join us, like Heather today, from afar, or topics that you're interested in, we would very much welcome your feedback. You can find me in the UNDP system. My last name is Araujo, Gustavo Araujo. So if you have suggestions of speakers, resources, and topics, we would very much love to hear from you. So this has been one more presentation of the Virtual Career Lab from the Talent Development Unit, promoting a self-driven and continuous learning culture at UNDP. We very much appreciate your participation and enthusiasm today, and we are looking forward to seeing you again, maybe in person in a country office someday, or virtually as well. So from all of us here in New York City, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.